My name is Jeffrey Breau, and I am a program lead for the Psychedelics and Spirituality Initiative at Harvard Divinity School's Center for the Study of World Religions. By way of disclosure, the research that I'm talking about today is funded by the center through the Harvard Study of Psychedelics in Society and Culture. Today, I'm going to be asking what established religious traditions that are interested in incorporating psychedelic use might be able to learn from novel psychedelic spiritual communities. After introducing my research, I'm going to focus on three ways that these novel churches are operating. First, how they're navigating diverse sacramental experiences. Second, how they are ritualizing safety and the law. And third, how they are building community against the new age/cult bind. And I'm going to close with a tiny hope. Always a great way to end a talk, especially these days. This presentation is drawing from preliminary findings of my ethnographic research with psychedelic churches in the United States. The study focuses on what I refer to as novel psychedelic spiritual communities, or NPSCs. As the name implies, NPSCs are new religious organizations forming around psychedelics. They are distinct from indigenous plant medicine traditions and are unaffiliated with major world religions. My research uses a mix of semi-structured interviews, participant observation, and digital ethnography, and it seeks to better understand how these communities are forming, their theologies and their rituals, their approaches to safety and the law, and what NPSCs suggest for the future of religion in America. I'm currently working with 5 communities, 4 of which are operating as nonprofit religious organizations, and one that is a diffuse group of spiritual but not religious practitioners who practice with psychedelics in the so-called recreational space, places like Burning Man. To date, I've conducted over 50 interviews and have spent about 200 hours in the field. Given the time constraints, I'm going to be presenting my findings in broad strokes, but I'm happy to go into specifics in the Q&A. Given that psychedelic experiences can range from the blissful to the hellish to the just plain weird, NPSCs adopt a relational understanding of sacraments that helps them to ensure all psychedelic experiences are accounted for, accepted, and supported. Before discussing this relational approach, what does it mean for something to be a sacrament? When my interlocutors are referring to psychedelics as sacraments, they are typically signaling 2 things. They're signaling first that these substances are core to their religious practice, and 2, that the psychedelic experience produces something they consider sacred. It is a sacred experience. This is deceptively straightforward. Are psychedelic sacraments because they bind to certain receptors in the brain, or because they connect people to non-dual reality or to astral realms? Or are they sacraments because the plants and molecules themselves are agentic spirits or gods? The NPSCs I work with strive to make space for all of these perspectives to coexist. For example, one community spent a long time debating how they would describe the sacramental experience in the church. Was it an experience of God, or mystery, or truth? They ultimately settled on the word divine because, quote, the word divine, we realized, was general enough that it could allow for the diversity of incoming member lineages, end quote. Importantly, people also have psychedelic experiences that they don't consider divine. They have banal trips and they have bad trips. NPSCs account for this in a variety of ways, including through the safety procedures that I'm going to discuss next. Theologically, though, NPSCs apply what I think of as a relational understanding of their sacraments in order to account for this diversity of experience. The psychedelic substance in these communities alone is not the sacrament. Rather, it is the relationship between the substance, the individual, the setting, the community, the divine, etc., that is the sacrament. My interlocutors often stress that they do not worship these substances, nor do they believe that psychedelic sacraments are bestowers of uncomplicated grace, nor are psychedelics panaceas, nor are they appropriate sacraments for everyone. A relational sacramental theology is one approach that the Abrahamic traditions we're speaking about here might adopt to ensure that their communities do not dangerously circumscribe the range of experiences members will have with these substances. Since NPSCs are organized around ceremonial psychedelic use, their religions are shaped by the unique safety, ethical, and legal challenges that psychedelics present. One example of this can be seen in intention setting rituals. Intention setting opens many NPSC psychedelic ceremonies and they are an opportunity for participants and facilitators to articulate loosely held goals for the trip. As I've written about elsewhere, intention-setting rituals function as rites of separation that promote psychological safety and group cohesion before a trip by allowing participants to reflect on their inner state and share it with the group. Intention-setting rituals also sacralize the trip, and they do so by cultivating a shared sense that what is being embarked on has personal, communal, and spiritual meaning. Another example of ritualized safety is seen in consent processes. At one retreat I observed, the weekend opened with 11 community agreements. It was an opportunity for participants to ask questions and share their perspective before they consented to how the church was practicing. The process also allowed the facilitators to articulate how they were approaching physical and psychological safety, and it also allowed them to articulate how they were approaching spiritual safety. In those 11 agreements, there were items about touch and not leaving the property, at least with your physical body, along with agreements about metaphysical interventions, such as having protective spirits channeled or called in on one's behalf. Far from tangential or pro forma, approaches to psychedelic safety scaffold NPSC ceremonies, and they inscribe the community's beliefs through ritualized community care. The law, too, is shaping how NPSCs are devising their rituals and constructing their theologies. The use of the term sacrament, for example, to describe psychedelics is one way that NPSCs are attempting to make themselves legible to the US legal system. Another example, this also is drawn from that retreat I just mentioned, the psilocybin ceremony there opened with everyone watching from their mats as an ornate box was moved from the altar to the center of the circle and unlocked. Mason jars of dried mushrooms were pulled from the box, and the facilitators selected each serving by listening for the voice of the mushroom. The mushrooms were then placed on a jeweler's scale, and the final weight was recorded in a ledger. It wasn't until the facilitators told the participants why they were doing this that I realized much of the ritual was designed to comply with their understanding of the law. The box had been locked to prevent diversion, and the weight was documented to provide a record in case the DEA ever came knocking. NPSCs are a stark example of the way that religion is being shaped by safety in the law. But even established religions will need to adapt their practices to meet the challenges and circumstances of psychedelics. NPSCs may be a model for how navigating psychedelics risks can be ritualized and turned into a wellspring of religious meaning. With the advance of decriminalization, it's relatively easy for individuals to have safe and semi-legal psychedelic experiences without joining or starting a church. Why then are my interlocutors spending the time and the energy and taking on increased risk to practice in community? When I speak to founders, it is often a message or an intuition arising during one of their psychedelic trips that they point to as the genesis of the community. Here's how one founder put it, quote, I was getting to where there would be a pretty deep kind of mystical experience, and then I was getting these words, which were like, you can sit, or you should sit with others. This is to be shared. It's possible to hear this quote and think that this is an example of someone taking drugs and deciding to start a cult. One of the interesting things that I find about working so closely with these communities is the emphasis that they place on sharing rather than leading or proselytizing. The desire they're expressing is to be in community around sacred experience, not to convert people to a particular view or dictate a particular way of believing or behaving. As such, these NPSCs may provide a model for avoiding high control or abusive forms of religious community. It's also, working with these communities, another interesting thing is how self-conscious both members and founders are of public skepticism. One of my interlocutors put it this way. She's trying to avoid, and the community is trying to avoid, the self-help guru trap and the cult leader trap. As new religious movements in the US, NPSCs are caught between two poles of public skepticism. On the one hand, there's skepticism that they are vapid, individualistic New Agers. And on the other hand is skepticism that they are high control, brainwashing cults. Such stereotypes, unproductive and untrue though they may be, influence how NPSCs understand themselves and are likely going to complicate their paths to religious freedom. The established Abrahamic monotheistic traditions that we're talking about here will undoubtedly face similar skepticism when they move to incorporate psychedelic sacraments. Unlike NPSCs, these established religions will be able to point to their home traditions as a source of legitimacy. As a result, it may be tempting for established religions to gain legal and social acceptance of their psychedelic use by contrasting themselves with the more culturally suspect NPSCs. By way of a little scholarly advocacy, my tiny hope is that monotheistic or Abrahamic psychedelic traditions won't bolster their cultural capital by denigrating NPSCs. Rather, I hope that as established religions adopt psychedelic practices, they will seek to learn from and support these new religious movements. NPSCs have a lot to teach established religions, and more importantly, they are religions with an equally sincere desire for, and indeed right to, spiritual healing, community, and divine experience. Thanks so much.